I never believed in fate until the day my husband's mistress sent me her resume. It came through our company's digital portal like every other application, buried between a sea of forgettable cover letters and LinkedIn links. I was in my office, sipping a bitter espresso and half watching the fog roll in over San Francisco Bay when I clicked it open. The name stopped my breath. Jasmine Reyes. I hadn't heard her voice. I'd never seen her face. But I knew that name like a scar. It had appeared on Miles's phone enough times to burn itself into my subconscious. Messages at 1:27 a.m. like, "Still thinking about last night. Wish you could stay longer." Or the worst one, "I wish she didn't exist." She. That was me. I stared at the application, hands trembling with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Something between horror and fascination. She had a Columbia MBA, fluent in Spanish, and experience at a small boutique firm in Miami. She listed branding innovation as her passion and described herself as hungry to grow in a mission-driven company led by women. Mission-driven. Laughed. It came out of me like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for months. Raw, jagged, unhinged. The kind of laugh that comes right before a woman snaps. This was no accident. No woman with Jasmine's qualifications applied for an internship at Carlyle Brand's studio, unless she was desperate, or unless the universe had decided to test me, in a way that would split my life cleanly into a before and after. I could have rejected the application with one click. I could have stormed home and thrown Miles's clothes off the balcony. I could have chosen the expected path. But I didn't. Instead, I forwarded her resume to our HR manager with one line: "Schedule her interview. I want to meet her myself." From that moment forward, something in me shifted. My grief, something that had been sitting heavily in my chest like wet concrete, began to move. Not dissolve, not disappear, but change shape. It was no longer a weight, it was a weapon. On the day of her interview, I arrived at the office early. I wore a black silk blouse I'd bought in Milan and a navy blazer that I'd never worn in front of Miles. I tied my hair back into a low twist, the way I used to before I married, before softness started to feel like obligation, in the mirror. I looked like the woman I was before marriage. Sharper, meaner, cleaner. A woman who could build an empire from scratch and burn it down if she had to. Jasmine arrived 15 minutes early, just like a perfect candidate. She wore a rose-pink blouse, tucked into fitted black trousers. Her makeup was professional, her hair long and straight, and she had the gleam in her eye of someone trying very hard to impress a woman she admired. She had no idea who I was. The thought nearly made me laugh again. "Ms. Carlyle will see you. Now," my assistant announced. I watched Jasmine walk into my office like it was any other interview. She extended her hand with practiced confidence. "Emma Carlyle," I said smoothly. "CEO and founder. It's good to meet you." Her smile was bright, full of promise. "Thank you for this opportunity, Ms. Carlyle. I've followed your work for years. Your brand rebuild for Jackson Rowe was genius." She's charming, I noted internally, and she knows how to flatter. But what struck me most wasn't her charm. It was how unaware she was, how she looked at me with clear, innocent eyes, completely ignorant to the fact that I knew everything, that I had the receipts, the dates, the locations. The photos from the hotel in Santa Monica. I could have thrown them on the desk right then and asked her how my husband tasted in bed. Instead, I smiled. We talked for 42 minutes. I asked the hard questions, not just about her experience, but about her motivations. Why this firm? Why now? What kind of mentor did she need? "I want to work for someone who inspires me," she said. I nodded, writing down something fake on my leather-bound notepad. "And your availability?" "Completely flexible. Nights, weekends, whatever it takes." Of course you are, I thought. You already have been. When she left, I didn't breathe for several seconds. Then I picked up the phone. "She's hired," I told HR. "Start the onboarding process immediately." And with that, phase 1 had begun. Jasmine's first day was a masterclass in tension. She arrived early, portfolio in hand, full of fresh ideas for an account she hadn't even been briefed on yet. Her initiative was impressive. I almost hated how impressive she was. She reminded me of me, before the marriage, before the long silences with Miles at dinner, before the business trips that were always poorly timed, before I started sleeping with my back to the man I once wanted to grow old beside. Jasmine shadowed me in every meeting, took notes with ferocity, asked smart questions. She learned fast, smiled easily, laughed at my jokes. I could see why he wanted her. What he didn't know was that she was now mine. I studied her like a scientist. Every behavior, every instinct. And then I began the manipulation. Subtle, elegant, professional. I left my wedding ring on the table at a strategy session. I accidentally called Miles on speakerphone while she was in the room. "Hey, babe," he said. "Dinner tonight?" "Of course, darling. 7 at Larkspur. I'll wear that green dress you love." I didn't even look at Jasmine, but I saw her flinch. It would have been easier to hate her if she were stupid, or mean, or fake. But she wasn't. She was intelligent, warm, earnest. She worked harder than anyone else in her cohort. That only made it worse. I began assigning her to more visible projects, knowing Miles kept tabs on my company through Google alerts and LinkedIn updates. I wanted him to see her next to me. I wanted him to panic, and he did. That night at home, as I pulled risotto from the oven, he asked, "How's your new intern working out?" "She's surprisingly capable," I said lightly. "Though, sometimes I wonder if she's hiding something." He didn't look at me for a long time. Probably nothing. Entry-level stress. Maybe. I poured wine. Red. The kind that stains. From there, I escalated everything, little by little. I started placing framed photos of our wedding in my office. I added Miles's name to our internal newsletter's employee spouse spotlight just once, just enough for Jasmine to notice. I kept watching, waiting, plotting. One day I walked past her desk and saw her staring at her phone, brows furrowed. The light in her eyes had dulled. "Everything okay?" I asked. She looked up too quickly. "Yes, just tired." I leaned in just slightly. "Be careful who you let tire you." That night, I opened the locked drawer in my desk. Inside, a flash drive. A private investigator's report, phone records, photographs, and a single note I wrote to myself the night I found out. This is not the end. This is the blueprint. This wasn't about divorce. This was about design. And I was just getting started. If this story has you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. Your support helps us bring more thrilling, emotionally complex stories like this to life. Now let's see if you've been paying attention. Question of the day. Why did Emma hire Jasmine, her husband's mistress? A. She wanted to confront her in the office and fire her in person. B. She wanted to orchestrate a strategic revenge, using Jasmine as part of her plan. Drop your answer below, A or B, and let's see who's really following the mind games. The strangest part wasn't watching my husband's mistress refill my coffee every morning. It was how easily I got used to it. Jasmine was efficient. Too efficient. In our second week working together, she'd already memorized my schedule, my preferred fonts, the order I liked my reports delivered, and how I took my tea. Hibiscus, with honey, not sugar. She anticipated meetings before I mentioned them, and once corrected a numerical discrepancy in a pitch deck before I even saw it. I should have fired her for being too competent. But instead, I assigned her more. Part of me wanted to push her to exhaustion, to see her crack under the pressure and expose herself. The other part, I didn't want her to fail. That was the dangerous part. The part that kept me up at night. Because for all the fury that lived in my chest like a hive of hornets, Jasmine Reyes was the intern I might have once mentored. In another life. In a different marriage. She didn't know that every late night we spent at the office was a calculation. Every accidental run-in with Miles in the lobby, each Friday lunch she got invited to, every proximity, those were by design. What she didn't realize was that I was rewiring her idea of what safety looked like, reprogramming the narrative she thought she was living in. She thought she was rising. She thought I saw her, and I did, just not in the way she imagined. Late one night after our quarterly review meeting ran overtime, she asked if she could stay a little longer to finish formatting the deck. I nodded without looking up. "Take your time," I said. As I stood to leave, she hesitated. "Emma," she said carefully, Do you think I'm doing okay? I mean, do I seem like someone who belongs here?" I turned to look at her. It wasn't the question that caught me. It was how raw it was. She wasn't trying to flatter me. She genuinely wanted to know. She wanted validation from the woman whose life she'd been unknowingly unraveling. "You're doing more than okay," I said. "You're smart, sharp, and you're not afraid of hard work." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile people wear when they're not sure if they deserve it. "I just feel like I'm always trying to prove I'm enough," she murmured. I let the silence stretch between us. "That feeling doesn't go away," I told her. "You just get better at disguising it." When I left the office that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, because in the quiet corners of our shared ambition, I could see myself in Jasmine. The younger version of me who'd clawed her way up, starved for approval, too naive, to recognize when the attention of powerful men came at a cost. And that was the line I began walking, between revenge and reluctant empathy, between power and pity, between the wife and the woman who could have been. Miles had no idea I was spending my days and nights building something far more dangerous than a divorce case. I was building a woman's awakening, and I was using Jasmine to do it. One Monday morning, Jasmine arrived visibly shaken. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back messily, and her eyes had that dull, swollen tint of someone who hadn't slept. She pretended nothing was wrong, but I didn't pretend with her. "Rough weekend?" I asked. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Just personal stuff." "Anyone hurting you?" I said it gently, like a friend would. Her eyes flinched. She looked down. "No," she said. "Just confusion. Relationships are hard, I guess." I didn't press. I didn't have to. Because I already knew. Miles had tried to cancel their Saturday plans at the last minute, citing a family emergency, not realizing that I had deliberately booked him for a full day at our community fundraiser. Jasmine had seen the photos on the company's social feed, him in a branded t-shirt, me at his side. I had made sure they were posted, and she was unraveling. Quietly, beautifully. The following week, I implemented a new creative development initiative, a mentorship program for up-and-coming women in our firm. Jasmine, naturally, was the first to be assigned a mentor. Me. It gave us structure, an excuse to meet privately. I framed it as professional development. In reality, it was a slow psychological war. I introduced her to old pitches I'd written. In my early days, let her sit in on high-stakes meetings, offered gentle criticism, generous praise. I layered trust with tension. Always close, always cordial, never quite safe. and I began telling her stories. "I remember my first year in branding," I said one afternoon as we walked along the Embarcadero. "I worked for a man who told me I was too emotional to lead strategy meetings." Jasmine frowned. "That's so sexist," I smiled. "He didn't mind when I used those emotions to sell $1 million campaign." We laughed together, and somewhere in that laughter, she started letting her guard down. Not because she trusted me, but because I was showing her who she could become. She didn't know I was doing it to draw her in. "And Miles?" He noticed. "How's Jasmine doing?" he asked one night, swirling his wine lazily at dinner. "She's promising," I said. He nodded too slowly. "You should be careful," he added. "Sometimes promising people disappoint you." "Oh," I said, meeting his eyes. "I know." I let the weight of those words land. The next day, I left an annotated deck on Jasmine's desk with a handwritten note. "Your voice matters. Don't be afraid to use it louder." She carried that paper around like scripture, but the pressure was building. She started missing small things, forgetting passwords, arriving late to meetings, fumbling when asked questions she used to answer flawlessly. The guilt was catching up to her, and guilt is fertile ground, because when people feel guilty, they start talking, they overshare, they confess, they reach for redemption. And I was right there, waiting, arms crossed, heart steeled, smile soft. I took her out for tea that Friday, one of our now weekly mentorship check-ins. She wore a pale blue sweater that made her look younger than usual. "How are things?" I asked. She hesitated. "I feel like something's breaking," she said. "Not here. Personally. I don't know. I feel like someone's lying to me." I tilted my head. "Someone like a boyfriend?" She nodded. "He says he loves me, but it feels secret, like I'm in this hidden life and he gets to live out loud." "That's not love," I said. She looked up sharply. "That's control." She blinked fast, trying not to cry in public, and I leaned in, just enough. "You deserve someone who stands next to you in the light, Jasmine, not someone who hides you in the shadows." She didn't respond, just stared down at her untouched tea, but the crack had formed. That night, I sat in bed alone, watching the rain tick against the window. Miles was in LA for a client dinner. Jasmine, I knew, was not with him. I had made sure of that. And now the question was no longer when the truth would emerge. It was how much of it I would let her see before I turned the final page. Because I hadn't hired her to destroy her. I had hired her to teach a lesson, to both of them, and perhaps in the process to myself. Let them underestimate me. That was always the first mistake. The next would cost them everything. The first time I saw Jasmine flinch at the sound of my husband's name, I knew the mirror had started to crack. It was subtle, a ripple, one of those barely perceptible flickers in the face, the kind that only registers when you've spent weeks cataloging someone's tells. We were reviewing pitch concepts for a wellness rebrand, and I casually said, "Oh, Miles mentioned a competitor's version of this product last night." She blinked, then dropped her pen. I said nothing, just watched her reach for the pen too quickly, her cheeks flushed, eyes suddenly unable to meet mine. There it was. Proof. She had begun to suspect the truth, and she was afraid of it. By then, Jasmine had become a fixture at Carlisle Brand Studio. Clients loved her. She'd begun presenting parts of our decks solo, owning the room with fresh ideas, polished confidence, and just enough humility to seem endearing. If I hadn't known what I knew, I would have recommended her for promotion. But that's the thing about betrayal. It dulls the light around everything. It makes even brilliance look tarnished. Still, I had waited. Carefully. Calculatedly. And now, it was time for something less subtle. 2 weeks before our company's annual gala, I gave Jasmine a new responsibility: manage the VIP guest list. It's a great way to get closer to the client circle, I said casually. She nodded enthusiastically. Thank you. I won't let you down. I handed her a printed list, watching her eyes scan the names. She froze at one entry. Miles Carlyle. Her lips parted slightly. I could almost hear her heartbeat from across the room. My husband never RSVPs on time, I added lightly. He'll come, though. He never misses this event. We met at this gala, actually. I offered a smile. A warm, proud wife smile. 12 years ago. He spilled champagne on my dress. Took me out the next night to make up for it. The rest is history. Her throat worked as she swallowed. She didn't say a word. But she didn't have to. The truth was assembling itself in her head like puzzle, pieces locking into place. After that day, Jasmine was no longer the same. She came in early. Stayed later. But the brightness was gone. The bounce in her step diminished. She moved like someone walking across a frozen lake, listening for cracks. She'd begun seeing herself in the wrong story, and I was the one writing it. In the days leading up to the gala, I became colder. Not cruel, never that, just distant, less praise, fewer check-ins. A sharp contrast to the mentorship warmth I'd wrapped around her like a shawl. This shift served 2 purposes. First, it made her question what she'd done wrong. Second, it let her feel the silence I'd felt for months in my own home. When Miles would walk past me like I was part of the furniture, his mind elsewhere, his affection rationed. It worked. She asked to meet with me the Thursday before the event. We sat across from each other in the quiet conference room, and she took a long breath before speaking. Have I disappointed you? I looked up slowly. Why would you think that? I don't know. Something's shifted. And I don't want to lose this. Whatever this has been. I tilted my head. What do you think this has been? Her voice was barely a whisper. A chance. To do what? To become someone. I stood and walked to the window, letting her squirm in the silence. You are someone, Jasmine, I said. That's not the problem. Then what is? I turned to her, giving her just enough eye contact to twist the knife. You're not the first person to mistake attention for affection, or opportunity for intimacy. She froze. I let it hang there. Then I dismissed her with a gentle nod, leaving the room before she could respond, because I wanted her to walk into that gala with her nerves frayed, her world tilting. The night of the event arrived, and I wore red. A deep, backless Valentino gown Miles had once begged me to wear to his college reunion. Red was his weakness. Power, desire, danger. Jasmine was stationed at the front desk with the guest list, dressed in a demure black cocktail dress, her eyes scanning every name like it might bite her. She saw me before I greeted her. Her face went pale. You look beautiful, she said, voice tight. I leaned in and adjusted her name tag. Are all the VIPs checked in? Almost, she whispered. I walked away without waiting for the rest. 10 minutes later, Miles arrived, his face drained of color the moment he saw us. I greeted him warmly, kissed him lightly on the cheek, then turned and gestured to Jasmine. Darling, have you met our newest rising star? Jasmine Reyes. She's been assisting me on the Wilder project. I watched them shake hands. Miles's grip was stiff. Jasmine's fingers trembled. They barely made eye contact. Pleasure, he said. Likewise, she murmured. And just like that, the stage was set. Throughout the night, I orchestrated everything, like a symphony. I made Jasmine fetch drinks for us both. I included her in conversations where I talked about Miles's and my recent Napa getaway. I asked her to take photos of us together. I thanked her, in front of a small crowd, for helping me plan our upcoming anniversary campaign. It was elegant warfare, and both of them were collapsing in slow motion. By midnight, Miles had retreated to a corner, feigning a headache. Jasmine stood near the restroom, visibly shaking. No one else noticed, because no one else knew. But I did. The woman my husband had slept with was breaking apart 5 feet away from me, while he stood stunned, humiliated and powerless to stop it. But this wasn't the climax. This was the reckoning before the reckoning. What neither of them understood, what they couldn't, was that this wasn't the moment I had been building toward. This was just the prologue, because the truth wasn't enough. The destruction of their delusions wasn't enough. I wanted consequence, and to get it, I needed one last move. The next morning, I called Jasmine into my office. She was pale, her voice hoarse. "I didn't know," she said before I could speak. "I swear to you, I didn't know who you were." I watched her, waited, and said nothing. I would never. If I'd known... I raised a hand. "Stop." She fell silent instantly. I stood, walked around my desk, sat on its edge and looked her in the eyes. "I'm not here to humiliate you, Jasmine." She frowned, confused. "I brought you into this world," I continued, "because I needed you to see it, to feel it, to understand how small your part in it actually is." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Truly." "I don't want your apology," I said. "I want your choice." She looked up. "You'll be coming with me to Austin next week. There's a pitch we've been invited to lead for a national lifestyle brand." She blinked. "Okay." 1 hotel room. "I hope that's not uncomfortable." She didn't respond. She just nodded, numbly, because she knew, even if she didn't fully understand, she knew she was no longer in control of this story. I was. And the final chapter hadn't even begun. The Plaza Hotel in Austin smelled faintly of eucalyptus and old money, the kind of place that polished its marble twice a day and served wine you didn't need to pretend to like. I had chosen it deliberately. 1 part luxury, 1 part confinement. It was the kind of place that seemed neutral, professional, respectable. But behind the facade, I had designed every detail of this trip to force one truth into the open. There would be no escape. We checked in just after 7 p.m., fresh off a successful client dinner where Jasmine had impressed the table with her insights on Gen Z consumer behavior. She'd been poised, articulate, disarmingly charming. You wouldn't have guessed that she hadn't slept the night before, or that her nails were bitten to the quick. The desk clerk handed us a single key card, as I'd arranged. 1 suite, he said. Jasmine looked at me, hesitation flickering across her face. There was a mix-up with the booking, I said lightly. Convention season. They're completely full. I hope you don't mind sharing. She forced a small smile. Of course not. The suite was gorgeous. High ceilings, gold accents, 2 queen beds, separated by a vintage oak writing desk. It wasn't romantic, it was clinical. Purpose-built for strategy, not intimacy. I poured us both glasses of Cabernet from the welcome tray and opened the sliding door to the balcony, letting the cool Texas air cut the stiffness between us. Jasmine stood in the middle of the room, her arms folded across her chest like she needed to physically hold herself together. You were incredible tonight, I said. She looked up. Thanks. We drank in silence for a while. The weight between us thickened with every minute, until it felt like the air itself had grown dense with unspoken things. And then, as if pulled by some internal force, Jasmine said it. You know, don't you? I didn't pretend to misunderstand. Instead, I set my glass down, walked over to the desk, and pulled out a leather folder from my bag. I laid it on the bed closest to her. She stared at it. What is that? Proof, I said. Of everything. She didn't move. Her hands were clenched into fists. I knew before you submitted your application, I continued, before you even walked into my office. Still, she didn't touch the folder. I knew where you worked, where you lived, your student debt balance. I knew about the money you send to your mother in Arizona every month. I knew what time you go to the gym, what kind of coffee you drink, and what brand of perfume you wore the night you were with my husband. Her knees buckled, and she sat down on the edge of the bed as if her body could no longer hold itself upright. You planned this? She whispered. Yes. You created that position. For me? I created the entire situation for you. She finally reached for the folder, opening it with trembling hands. Inside, photographs, screenshots, timestamps, call logs, surveillance stills that captured her and Miles in hotels, restaurants, his car. Evidence, pages and pages of it. This is sick, she said, her voice cracking. Why would you do this? Why not just fire me? Or leave him? I sat on the other bed across from her, hands folded. Because firing you would have been simple, and divorcing him would have been expected. I don't do simple. I don't do predictable. Her tears fell silently, one by one. Jasmine, I said softly, this isn't about punishment. This is about consequence. What you did, you may have done unknowingly, but the damage was real, and now you have a choice. I reached into my bag again and handed her a sealed envelope. She opened it. 2 documents. 1, a letter of resignation from Carlisle Brand Studio, signed and dated but not yet executed. The other, a formal job offer from a top creative agency in New York, Marston and Gray. A real firm, a real salary, a real future. I don't understand, she whispered, eyes darting between the pages. You're helping me? I'm offering you a way out, a way forward. But why? Because I believe in potential, even when it's been misused. And because I've seen what happens to women like you when men like Miles are left unchecked. She looked up at me then, truly looked. No longer as a mentor or a boss, but as a woman. He told me you didn't love him anymore, that you were obsessed with work, that you slept in separate rooms. He said he was waiting for the right time to end things. I nodded slowly. Did he tell you I had an affair with my COO too? Her eyes widened. Yes. And that we were practically separated? She nodded again. Well, none of that was true. She wiped her face. So I was just, what, the next in line? The youngest in line, I said. Not the first, just the newest. She fell silent. I've been married to him for 12 years. I know who he is. And now you do too. She reached for her glass but didn't drink. Why give me the New York offer? Because you have talent, Jasmine. And you've been used. You don't owe him your career. You don't owe him your destruction. She looked down at the offer again. Then at me. What happens if I stay? You'll be gone by Monday either way. But staying means we do this the hard way. Publicly. With consequences you'll never outrun. She nodded. Then I'll go, she said. But only if you let me help you first. I didn't respond at first. Just studied her. Why? Because he lied to me, too. And because I don't want to be someone who walks away without making it right. I didn't smile. But something inside me thawed. In that case, I said, we have work to do. She folded the resignation letter and tucked it into her purse. The alliance was forged. Not in forgiveness, but in reckoning. And as we turned off the lights and lay in separate beds, staring at the same ceiling, I knew this had never been a game. It was a transformation, for both of us. The real power of betrayal is that it forces you to choose. Will you be destroyed, or will you redefine yourself so completely that the people who betrayed you no longer recognize what you've become? I had made my choice the moment Jasmine Reyes walked into my office wearing a perfume I'd smelled on my husband's shirt. But the final execution was something else. More than strategy, more than revenge. It was reclamation. And it began the moment we returned from Austin. Jasmine kept her word. She didn't resign immediately. She stayed. Quietly. Deliberately. She moved through the office with practiced ease, no longer just an intern or a rising star, but a double agent. The woman who had once been my husband's secret was now my silent accomplice. Together we played the final moves of a very long game. She fed Miles misinformation. Slivers of gossip about board transitions, whispers that I was planning to step back from operations. She hinted at tension with Trevor, our COO, knowing full well Miles would take that bait. And he did. Predictably. What Miles didn't know was that every moment of his carelessness was being documented. Every gift he bought with our shared credit card. Every dinner he expensed under a fake name. Every phone call Jasmine allowed him to believe was still private. It was all cataloged, time-stamped, and filed away. Meanwhile, I had been orchestrating something far more intricate behind the scenes. With Trevor's help, I'd created a shell entity, Evergold Capital, that slowly bought out Miles's shares in Carlisle Brand Studio. It took months of legal gymnastics and exacting paperwork. Miles thought he was investing in a luxury real estate fund. In truth, he was selling back his own influence to me, piece by piece. By the time it was done, his 12% stake had shrunk to 3%, and he had signed every document with his usual distracted confidence, too smug to notice the trap tightening around him. But the final performance would need an audience. When Miles suggested we host a private dinner for the executive team at our home, I knew he believed he was in control again. He saw it as an opportunity to build rapport, to position himself for a seat at the table he had no idea was already being dismantled beneath him. I agreed immediately. On the morning of the dinner, I dressed with ritual precision. A soft blue silk dress, his favorite. My hair in loose waves, makeup just enough to say I cared, but not enough to threaten. I greeted guests at the door with practiced ease, pouring wine, lighting candles, placing handwritten name cards at the table. Jasmine arrived last, under the pretense of helping serve. She wore black, professional, controlled, unapologetic. By the time we sat for dessert, the room was buzzing with light conversation and industry gossip. Miles stood, tapping his glass for attention. "I just want to say how proud I am of Emma," he said, smiling down at me like the devoted husband he once played so convincingly. "She's led this company with brilliance, and now, as she considers her next chapter, I hope we can all support her in the transition she deserves." I stood slowly, touched his arm, smiled. "Thank you, Miles," I said. "You're right. I have been preparing for a major change." The room fell quiet. And, since tonight is about transparency, I thought it best to share with you all the vision directly. I nodded to Trevor, who dimmed the lights. A projector screen lowered from the ceiling, an addition Miles had mocked when I had it installed. "What kind of dinner party needs a media presentation?" he'd asked. Mine, apparently. I clicked the remote. The first slide appeared, 2 side-by-side images. On the left, Miles kissing me goodbye in front of our house. On the right, time-stamped 25 minutes later, checking into the Fairmont with Jasmine. The room froze. Miles stiffened. The glass in his hand trembled. "What is this?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Parallel lives, I replied calmly. Or as I like to call them, the price of underestimating the wrong woman. I advanced the slides. More photos, more evidence. A full chronology of duplicity, of gaslighting, of betrayal dressed in expensive cologne and careful lies. When it was done, I turned to the stunned faces of our team. Before I open for questions, I said lightly, you'll each find a folder under your chairs. It contains 3 items: the formal restructure plan for our board, the legal documentation of Miles's share buyback, and my personal statement regarding our divorce, which will be filed tomorrow morning. Miles was speechless. I looked too. Jasmine, would you like to share your update as well? She stood slowly, her voice steady. I've accepted a senior strategy position at Marston & Gray in New York, she said. Emma has generously provided a reference and full transition support. My departure is effective at the end of this week. She met Miles's eyes then, not with guilt, not even with pain, but with understanding, and a kind of quiet authority he couldn't touch. How long? He asked, barely able to look at either of us. Long enough, I said. Long enough to ensure you walk away with exactly what you deserve. There were no screaming matches, no broken glasses, just silence, consequence, witnesses. Miles left that night with a duffel bag and the car keys I handed him without a word. The divorce moved swiftly. No contest, no fight. He knew what would surface if he resisted. Jasmine left for New York 2 weeks later. The morning of her flight, she handed me a sealed envelope. It's everything he ever told me about you, she said. The stories, the lies, the justifications. I thought you should see it. Or burn it. Your choice. I never opened it. Some truths aren't worth revisiting. Some stories serve no purpose but to keep a wound open. I chose the scar instead. The company not only survived the scandal, it thrived. My handling of the situation, honest but poised, earned Carlyle Brand Studio a reputation for integrity and resilience. I gave an interview with Adweek titled Leadership After Betrayal that was widely shared across the industry. For the first time, our brand stood not just for creativity, but for conviction. I launched a mentorship program for young women entering the creative sector, named after my grandmother, the woman who first taught me how to sew ideas into strength. Jasmine's new agency became one of our collaborators. We exchanged holiday cards, professional, quietly proud. As for Miles, he moved to Scottsdale. He married a pharmaceutical sales rep within a year. According to mutual friends, he tells a story about a career-obsessed wife who abandoned him emotionally. I let him tell it, because the truth is, I don't think about him much anymore. What exists between us now isn't rage or grief. It's something quieter. The satisfaction of knowing that when he tried to erase my worth, he exposed his own emptiness. That I didn't fall apart. I recalibrated. That I didn't scream. I rebuilt. That I didn't just survive. I rewrote the ending. And in that final act, I didn't just defend my dignity, I defined it. On my terms. And I'm still writing. Emma Carlisle's story is not merely about betrayal. It is about how one woman refused to let betrayal define the shape of her life. Over the course of 5 chapters, we witnessed a masterclass in emotional control, strategic foresight, and quiet strength. What began as a devastating personal discovery, the confirmation that her husband, Miles, was cheating, became the catalyst for something far more powerful: transformation. Emma could have screamed, she could have left, she could have played the victim. But instead, she chose a route few are capable of taking. She chose to listen before reacting, observe before accusing, and plan before confronting. She channeled her pain into purpose, choosing not simply to exit the relationship, but to design its ending on her terms. By hiring Jasmine Reyes, her husband's unsuspecting mistress, as an intern, Emma created not a trap, but an opportunity. a way to expose the truth through human experience, not vengeance. Along the way, something surprising happened. Emma did not just manipulate Jasmine, she began to see her. She discovered a young woman who was hungry for purpose, unaware of the role she had been cast in, and deserving of a chance at redemption. That insight deepened Emma's strength, because she didn't just crush her husband's betrayal, she turned its collateral damage into an ally. The relationship between Emma and Jasmine evolved from one of calculated proximity into one of profound mutual awakening. Both women were betrayed, and both had something to learn. Jasmine learned to recognize manipulation. Emma remembered the fire of who she used to be. Together they reclaimed what Miles tried to control: their autonomy, their futures, and their dignity. In the final act, Emma didn't just reveal the affair. She revealed the structure that allowed it to happen: the imbalance of power, the assumptions made about a woman's tolerance, the belief that silence equals weakness. And she dismantled it with grace, publicly, calmly, unforgettably. But perhaps the most important part of Emma's story is what she didn't do. She didn't destroy Jasmine. She empowered her. She didn't smear her husband's name across headlines. She simply handed him the consequences of his choices, clearly, legally, and irreversibly. Emma didn't let the betrayal consume her. She consumed it. She turned it into fuel, into narrative, into strategy. And through it all, she reminded us of something many forget. Your dignity is not what others give you. It's what you refuse to surrender. Life lesson and real-world application. What can we learn from Emma Carlisle? The lesson isn't take revenge. The lesson is reclaim authorship. We don't always choose the stories others try to cast us in: spouse, side character, obstacle, collateral. But we do choose whether we accept the role or rewrite the script. Emma's journey reminds us that composure is power, that silence can be strategic, and that control over one's response is often more impactful than any reaction. In real life, betrayal, whether romantic, professional, or personal, is inevitable at some point. The temptation is to explode, to burn everything down, to act quickly and emotionally. But the deeper path, the braver path, is to slow down, to see everything clearly, to decide not just how to end something, but how to elevate from it. Emma planned her divorce like a brand campaign. But the message wasn't revenge. It was clarity, confidence, and consequence. And that's something we can all carry with us. Next time life blindsides you, ask yourself, am I reacting or am I designing? And what would happen if I stopped asking why me and started asking what now? Because power doesn't come from control over others. It comes from control over yourself. Now it's your turn. Here's today's interaction question. If you were in Emma's shoes, what would you have done? A. Confronted Miles immediately and demanded a divorce. B. Stayed silent, observed, and created a strategic exit plan like Emma did. Comment your answer below. A or B, and share why you chose it. Also, what's your perspective on this story? Do you agree with Emma's decisions? Would you have done something different? Let us know in the comments. Your insights might inspire someone else. And if this story moved you, challenged you, or simply made you think, please subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to create more stories that speak to the power, complexity, and resilience in all of us.